Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hard4Games channel. I'm your host, Tony, and you may recall a couple of months back we covered an actual Ultra 64 prototype controller, i.e. a controller for the N64 before Nintendo had to change the design and the branding and the name. Now, the controller was similar to retail, but there were some notable differences. The biggest of which was the joystick, which felt different, looked different, was a different shape and size, etc. But unfortunately, the episode was kind of like a show and tell. We couldn't really play any games with it. We could just sort of show off the physicality of the controller. The reason being, if you recall, the connector was an RJ11 connector, which is basically like a phone jack, which is nothing like a retail N64 connector. But luckily, we'll take the joystick and place it wholesale into a retail controller without changing the housing and without changing the functionality. So today, we're actually going to be playing some games with an Ultra 64 N64 hybrid controller. So again, the joystick is authentic prototype joystick. The buttons are N64 buttons, but they were actually custom made by RockerGaming to sort of mimic the aesthetic of the Ultra 64, which is why this looks so different. So let's go ahead and get started.
This is Hard4Games. They're Hard4Games.
So how does this thing play? Well, it's a bit different. The biggest difference between the controllers, like I mentioned, is the joystick. The other buttons were laid out somewhat differently, slightly, or had marginally different shapes, but ultimately they were the same buttons. The joystick on the prototype has a large diameter with a larger stick that goes deeper into the controller, leading to a big diameter of movement. The retail stick is smaller and has ribs/grips. Your thumb can pretty easily fit over it, whereas your thumb is more so engulfed by the Ultra 64 joystick. Now, if you actually watch yourself playing N64, you'll notice that your thumb almost always goes to the edge of the stick, not dead center. It pushes the stick from side to side, one side to the other, up and down, and when your thumb is centered, the grips come into play. The Ultra 64 joystick is too big to do that. If you want to always be on the edge, you have a bit of a distance to travel. Right to left edge, up to down, etc. So you're better off being center or slightly off center. But there are no grips, so you slide just a bit, and it is a bit slippery. So you'll need to push down a bit harder to mitigate this, but simultaneously not push down hard enough to damage a one-of-a-kind controller. In terms of gameplay, let's go ahead and start with some simple movement. Here's Yoshi's Story. It's a 2D style platformer. The side-to-side movement is actually fine, but due to the stick's larger range, it takes a little bit of time to get used to. Precision is possible, but it's just slightly harder to achieve. Granted, it's also been about 10 years or more since I've played this game, so I could just be awful at it. So just let me know in the comments below how awful I am. Realistically though, this game kind of needs a D-pad, so having an even larger joystick just makes it more challenging. It's certainly possible to get used to, and as I kept playing, I adjusted. You know, again, not ideal, but it's fine. Here we have Viewpoint 2064, a canceled game we covered a few weeks back, which, by the way, it was released online, so go check it out if you'd like to. Now, the controller actually works really well here. You have large, sweeping motions back and forth, and it's pretty nice with this style of joystick. It kind of feels a little bit more arcadey with it. Now, granted, this is not an arcade stick, and it's nowhere near a flight stick, but it just feels slightly more in that direction. So it works well here. So now let's go ahead and go to the beginning with Mario 64. In fact, Mario 64 was a launch title and was very much designed with the controller in mind. Here's Mario circling some local flora. Here's the Ultra 64 controller. The same movements are possible, but notice the larger movement of my thumb to achieve the same thing. That said, there was also a tendency for Mario/my thumb to cut in and not perform a neat circle with the retail controller. I think it's just a little bit better for sharper, quicker movement. Now I'm trying to perform a volley of sideways somersaults with the retail controller. Here I'm doing the same thing with the Ultra 64 joystick. The volley is certainly possible with both, albeit a little bit more difficult with the prototype. I tended to miss more often. Now this is likely a combination of the joystick itself and the fact that Mario 64's moveset and timing is just so ingrained in me. So playing with this controller was an absolute pleasure. Obviously, you know, it's not finalized and therefore not an ideal way to play these games, but it's just a dream come true to finally be able to play an Ultra 64 or like with an Ultra 64 controller. It kind of puts us in this weird like echelon of people that have actually experienced this, because not too many people have, other than like Shane and some developers. Basically, it's weird, it's interesting, but like I said, it is certainly a childhood dream come to life, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate this over, and thank you again, of course, to RockerGaming for the added style points making these custom buttons right here. My only thing is that I just wish that we could play some version of Mario that was, you know, kind of more so meant for the joystick, like an earlier version, like the Shoshinkai demo, perhaps. Well, you know, one can dream. So thanks again, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and send you all off with a little segment by RockerGaming explaining how he created these custom buttons. Go ahead and check him out as well. Links in the description below. Thank you again for watching. Take care.
Hey Tony, what's happening? For those of you who don't know, I'm RockerGaming, and I run the RockerGaming channel here on YouTube, where we do all kinds of custom mods to consoles and controllers. When I caught wind that Tony was working on an N64 controller, and I don't mean any old N64 controller, but a replica of the Ultra 64 controller, I just had to volunteer my casting services to make a proper set of replica buttons for that controller. Anyway, let's get this thing out of here so we can get started. But, oh man, hold on a second. These things are just a pain to put on. Alright, good. I got it. Alright, now we can proceed. So what we're going to do to make these replica buttons as authentic as possible is we're going to make a silicone mold of the original N64 buttons. The process of mold making can be fairly complex, but in very simple terms, we're going to take our original N64 buttons, put them into a mold box, and use some platinum-based silicone to create a two-part mold. The end result should be an almost perfect duplicate of the original buttons, which we can then use to create our custom replicas. With the molds complete, we're going to go ahead and use some resin to try to match those colors as perfectly as we can and inject them into the molds. And with that being said, it's time for montage mode. Well, with the hard work out of the way, Tony, these are headed your way. I think they look great, and hopefully they fit the Ultra 64 theme perfectly.